Greetings. I am a time traveler from the year 2036. I am on my way home after getting an IBM 5100 computer system from the year 1975. My time machine is a stationary mass, temporal displacement unit manufactured by General Electric. The unit is powered by two top-spin dual positive singularities that produce a standard, offset, Tiplar sinusoid. I will be happy to post pictures of the unit. In late 2000 and early 2001, an anonymous user began posting on internet forums under the name timetravel_0, later identifying himself as John Titor, a soldier from the year 2036, claiming to be on a mission that had taken him back in time. Over several months, he engaged with members of time travel and science discussion boards, sharing detailed accounts of his supposed origin, the state of the world, and the technology he said made his journey possible. Titor portrayed himself as a US military operative assigned to retrieve a specific piece of computing hardware from the past, a mission he insisted was crucial for the future he came from. To support the plausibility of his story, Titor posted photographs and technical descriptions of his claimed time travel apparatus, a device he described in scientific terms involving dual singularities and temporal displacement units mounted in a vehicle. He also shared personal details, such as his origin in Tampa, Florida, and his motivation for stopping in the year 2000, which included visiting family and warning contemporary society about future threats. His posts blended technical language, personal narrative, and warnings in a way that attracted a broad audience and quickly made him one of the most memorable figures in early internet's fringe lore. Central to Titor's narrative was his explanation for why he had traveled backwards in time. He was tasked with acquiring an IBM 5100 computer from the year 1975. According to his posts, this machine had unique capabilities that would later be vital in debugging legacy computer systems from 2036, where he claimed outdated software issues posed a critical risk. Titor said that his grandfather had been involved in the design of the computer, giving him personal connection to the mission and further grounding his story in a seemingly mundane technological objective. Alongside this technical mission, Titor made a series of predictions about global events that he claimed would unfold in the early 21st century. He warned that the United States would experience significant civil unrest beginning in the mid-2000s, escalating into broader conflict that would fracture the nation into multiple regions. In his descriptions, this civil strife would eventually give way to a brief but devastating nuclear war he termed N-Day, with specific cities targeted and reconstructed orders of power emerging in the aftermath. In addition to his geopolitical forecasts, Titor described a future marked by widespread technological failure. He claimed that complex centralized systems had become increasingly fragile, leading to frequent breakdowns in computing, communications, and infrastructure. According to his account, reliance on legacy software and interconnected networks created cascading failures that governments were unable to contain. These breakdowns, he argued, accelerated social instability by disrupting transportation, power distribution, and access to basic services, reinforcing his broader warning that technological dependence without resilience would ultimately prove unsustainable. Titor also spoke about the resurgence of diseases he believed were linked to industrial practices and systemic neglect. One example he referred to was Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which he associated with contaminated beef products and failures in food safety oversight. This narrative weakened regulatory systems, and the pressures of mass production allowed such conditions to spread more easily, compounding public fear and mistrust. While his claims were speculative, they contributed to the perception of a failure in which public health crises were no longer isolated events, but symptoms of deeper structural collapse. As a result of these combined pressures, Titor described the world in 2036 had moved away from centralized authority and large-scale urban life. Communities, he said, became smaller, more localized, and increasingly agrarian, relying on self-sufficiency rather than national or global supply chains. Survival depended on practical skills, cooperation, and reduced dependence on technology that could no longer be maintained at scale. For many readers, these descriptions stood out not because they were precise predictions, but because they echoed broader anxieties about infrastructure, health, and resilience, overlap that helped sustain interest in Titor's story long after his disappearance from the forums. Despite the breadth and specificity of his claims, and despite some people interpreting these events as playing out as we speak, many of Titor's predictions, for example the timing of civil conflict and the outbreak of World War, did not occur within the timeframes he suggested for this timeline. Titor addressed potential discrepancies by invoking the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, arguing that his time travel created or accessed a different timeline, meaning the events he described might unfold differently or not at all in our world. This allowed his narrative to remain unfalsifiable to many followers and helped his story persist beyond the window of his direct predictions. When John Titor began posting in late 2000, the internet was a very different environment from the one that exists today. Large social media platforms did not yet dominate online interaction, and most discussion took place in forums, Usenet groups, and niche message boards. These spaces were smaller, slower, and often built around shared technical or intellectual interests. Users shared information without the need to shock for the purposes of monetization. Bots and algorithms didn't plague the forums, and credibility was established through consistency, knowledge, and the willingness to engage patiently over time. In this setting, a long-form narrative could develop organically, without immediate pressure to prove itself or collapse under mass scrutiny. The Time Travel Institute forums, where Titor's posts gained the most attention, functioned less like an audience and more like a workshop. Participants challenged claims, requested clarification, and debated physics and engineering concepts in detail. Titor responded in kind, often at length, addressing questions without urgency or emotional appeal. This mattered. He did not ask to be believed, nor did he frame himself as a prophet or a savior. His tone was procedural, occasionally dismissive of sensational interpretations, and focused on explanation rather than persuasion. In early internet culture, this restraint was often read as authenticity. Titor's use of obscure but verifiable details, such as the IBM 5100 computer, references to singularities, and descriptions of vehicle-mounted equipment, invited readers to investigate parts of his story independently. This created a feedback loop where confirming small factual elements increased confidence in the broader narrative, even when larger claims remained unprovable. The ability for users to fact-check fragments of his story without encountering immediate contradictions strengthened the impression that the account was internally coherent. Equally important was the absence of an obvious motive. Titor did not sell products, solicit money, or direct readers to external platforms. He did not attempt to build a following or escalate his claims as interests grew. When challenged, he often acknowledged uncertainty or deferred to probability rather than certainty. In a digital environment not yet saturated with monetized personas or performative outrage, this lack of apparent incentive made the story harder to dismiss outright. The possibility that someone might construct such a detailed narrative without visible reward unsettled both believers and skeptics. The timing of Titor's appearance amplified his impact. His posts emerged at the edge of a technological transition marked by Y2K anxiety, rapid digitization, and growing awareness of systemic vulnerability. Public trust in institutions was eroding, while reliance on complex technological systems was increasing. Against this backdrop, a narrative warning of infrastructural collapse, civil unrest, and the limits of progress resonated beyond its specific claims. The internet did not simply transmit the John Titor story, it provided the conditions under which it could feel plausible, participatory, albeit unresolved. Titor's posts quickly drew widespread attention, spreading across forums and generating discussion amongst believers, skeptics, and curious observers. Some were intrigued by the technical details he provided, while others engaged with his cultural and societal observations. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video in the first place was because I, myself, was one of these people, logging in for daily updates via internet forums and user-created websites such as geocities.com via the computers in my high school library. Mainstream media and academic commentators eventually took notice of the phenomenon, analyzing Titor's language, claims, and the psychology of his audience, pointing out inconsistencies and unfulfilled predictions that suggested either fabrication or metaphor rather than genuine time travel. Investigations into the origins of the John Titor persona have suggested it may have been an elaborate hoax. An inquiry in 2009 identified a possible connection to individuals in Florida, though none of those implicated publicly acknowledged creating the posts. Despite the lack of verifiable evidence supporting Titor's claims, the story has continued to capture the imagination of internet communities and pop culture. It has been referenced in works of fiction, inspired discussions on physics and the nature of time, and fed into broader debates about belief, technology, and the power of storytelling in digital spaces. For some, the John Titor narrative serves as a mirror reflecting early 21st century anxieties about technological collapse, war, and the fragility of social order. The enduring interest in Titor also highlights how extraordinary claims can persist long after their factual basis has been questioned. Whether viewed as a hoax, a performance art project, or an exploration of theoretical physics concepts through narrative, the John Titor saga remains one of the most discussed and debated legends born of the early internet. Its legacy continues in forum archives, documentaries, and speculative fiction, reminding us that even in an age of rapid information, compelling stories can take on lives of their own. That concludes this entry, but every shadow leads to another trace, and every trace to another unanswered question. If you want the next case as soon as it resurfaces, stay with us. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and step back into the dark with Noctombre.